Hey guys, Phil with the Royal Range USA here with Chris Paulson, and he is going to be taking us through this thing, an M134 minigun. This guy's the machine gun or minigun master, and so he's going to take it apart and kind of just how does a minigun work. I've never really known. I've known about miniguns for a long time, but I don't actually know how they work. So, Chris, what are we working with here?
All right, basically what we're looking at here is an original General Electric M134 minigun. I'll walk you through a few things as I take it apart, so we'll go from there. If you have any questions, just kind of ask me as we go.
So we did another video on this where we're actually shooting it and running it and just kind of talking about it a little bit. But this thing shoots around 6,000. There's two options actually. There's 2,000 and 4,000 rounds a minute, which is absolutely insane. And one of the things that makes this gun really cool is it runs completely off of electric power. So this tripod is specially built to house batteries underneath, and then it runs up obviously to the minigun. It powers the motor, which turns the whole action and gets that big chunk of metal spinning.
So first, we'll unhook the delinker. We'll take the delinker off. Basically, looking over here, it's going to be one cross pin. Pin out. Delinker comes out. I'm going to put this back together so I don't misplace my pin.
And we'll talk about the delinker later, but that's probably, from what you were sharing with me, that's probably one of the most complicated pieces of machinery on this entire gun.
Correct. So, we'll unhook the motor. Motor's pretty simple. It is 3 bolts to take apart. Hold this.
Yeah.
I'll grab those as I need them.
So the motor is what's actually driving the barrels and the delinker?
Correct. And you'll see here in a second where it's spinning on the rotor itself, where the gears connect. If you don't mind, just hold that up for me.
Sure.
Thank you.
So just for curiosity's sake, how much would a motor like this cost?
Anywhere between, I'd say, $5,000 to $8,000.
$5,000 to $8,000 for this particular motor. So you can't just go to the hardware store and grab a motor like this.
No, they're pretty specialty motors. The important thing about these things is not just the motor, but the gears themselves.
Exactly.
So this gear head that attaches, I mean, a very, very important part for this.
Because the gears on that motor is going to so these gears here is what's linking, bring it over here, is linking the barrel cluster and your delinker, am I correct?
Well, this is just running your rotor here.
Okay.
So your rotor, as we're going to get to here in a second, well, in a few minutes actually, is there's another gear assembly, and let me turn this over here so you can see this gear driving here, and then this gear drives the delinker right here.
So it's kind of like I would think of it kind of like a transmission type thing. It all kind of works together, kind of like a drivetrain.
Yep.
That's cool.
So we'll set this to the side, keep the bolts with it. Pull this pin. Let's get this out of the way. Okay. Let's actually take the bolts out next.
Okay.
I'm going to switch this around so it's a little bit easier for us to work on it.
So the serialized part of this gun, as you were describing to me, is actually this portion here is the actual gun, correct?
Correct.
What's serialized?
Here's an interesting fact for you, actually. So this part for me is serialized, okay? So for other manufacturers outside of the military, the housing is what's the serialized part. In the military, the housing is not serialized. It's the rotor inside the gun that's serialized. So depending, who you're talking to or asking, there's 2 different versions of what's serialized. So you have your safing selector and cover here. So we're going to open this up, and this is going to allow the bolts to pop out. So as you're going to see, the bolt is going to pop out. We're just going to reach in and grab it. Should slide. So here's just one of your bolts going on a track. No big deal.
So obviously for each of your barrels, you're going to have a bolt.
Correct.
Because you're going to have each barrel is functioning individually with its own bolt, obviously firing through each of your barrels.
Yep. So actually, while this is assembled, let me show you here real quick. Move the tang here. Get this cover closed. So as you see the track here, you have the top cam part of your bolt, the little spinny part. It's going to rotate inside here, and that's what's going to pull the bolt backwards or back forward. So you're taking the rounds in and out of the chambers with
So
this
it's-
bolt track right here.
So that's just a channel that's going to mechanically move those bolts back, is what you're saying?
Correct. And you will see that here in a second too. Now, as you can hear, as I spin it, you're going to hear the bolt snap. So right there, a firing pin just hit, which means a round just went off. We'll do it again. So every time you spin that, every time you hear it pop, the firing pin is releasing and sending a round out.
Now, which barrel is it actually firing? So we see the bolt action moving here, so it's firing out of this position here?
Correct. We talked about this earlier when we were shooting the gun. It's a little bit different with my yoke right here. The newer ones rotate the gun in a different position, but my gun, as it sits on my stand in the position, it fires at 2 o'clock. So if I click it right here, this barrel is launching around at 2 o'clock. You're looking at some of the other guns is how they're rotated. Most of them are going to fire at about 10 o'clock. So slightly different, nothing wrong with it. Again, it's just how it's positioned with the yoke on the stand.
Okay.
So if we want to take this thing apart, pretty simple. We're going to pop this back. It's a lot easier just to pull it like that. We're going to take one track out at a time. You don't have to necessarily take the bolts out or the nuts. So these tracks can slide out. I like to do it just a little bit easier for me. Here, let's put this over here. Okay, so this is going to allow me to take one bolt out, and this is your bolt right here. It's a little bit messy. Let me wipe it off for you real quick. Excuse the nice and grease.
Yeah, this thing needs a lot of grease to keep it running.
Yes, these guns love grease. Okay, so this is your bolt. As your bolt goes in there, basically you're just looking at, see the firing pin? There you go.
So
Snap.
so the rotation of the bolt is actually what's making the strike on the primer. So instead of having a hammer that comes up and hits it, it's the rotation of the barrel that's going to activate the striker?
Correct. So as this goes inside this cam that we talked about, right here, so your cam is going in your bolt track. So it's, as it rotates, it's coming back. This is where it's ejecting around. It's pulling around out and spitting it out your ejection port here. That being said, as it comes back the other way, it's going to push around inside the chamber on this side, and as it gets fully into battery, it's going to rotate and it's going to snap, and the firing pin's going to strike, and it's going to send that round down range.
Interesting.
So, pretty simple concept. There's really nothing to the top portion of this. Grab these bolts out. Oops, excuse me, fumbling here. A little slippery. Okay. Let's get the next track out. Now there is 6 tracks that hold all 6 bolts in. You only really have to take 3 out, which is pretty convenient. So if you take every other track out, you take 2 bolts out.
It's amazing the speed that this rotates. We talk about the cyclical rate, meaning how fast it fires, and we're talking about 4,000 rounds a minute. So what does that mean? That means that this, inside this casing, is spinning at 4,000 revolutions a minute. Is that correct?
Correct.
So you can think of it kind of like the engine that you have in your car, how quickly that's spinning your revolutions per minute. It's the same concept when it comes to this firearm and how quickly it's turning over. So that kind of explains why you need so much grease in there to keep things lubricated, to keep things moving, because it's pretty intense and pretty violent how this thing operates.
It's not a gun you really want to run dry. Okay.
So how long did it take you to learn the process of disassembling, functioning, getting this thing to run?
Well, working with machine guns a lot, it wasn't horribly difficult.
Because that's kind of your history previously, correct?
Correct. I went to school in 2004 for mechanical engineering before I joined the military. So having a little bit of base of knowledge with guns and whatnot, and kind of knowing what's going on mechanically, it wasn't super hard, but at the same time, It's a relatively complex gun. Little things can go wrong. The slightest bend and even a roll pin can stop the gun. So once you get to know it, it's like anything else. I mean, it's pretty simple now. At first,
Because your specialty was more in belt, when you were in the military, your training and your specialty and your role was more in belt feds and other firearms, correct?
correct. Again, I was a paratrooper in the military, so saw gunner first deployment, things like that. Guns weren't necessarily, keeping them running wasn't my priority, but
using them was.
using them was, yeah. So it wasn't an armor, but you know. Okay, we're just gonna take the cover off of here. Next, let's take the GCU off next.
What
So
is the
this
GCU?
The GCU is the gun control unit. This is your electronic system for this gun. Now, I did make this from scratch, so this is not a factory GCU. It's very, very similar. It runs off two 120-volt relays. It just got the dual trigger system on it versus factory. The newer ones only have the one trigger.
So does it come from the factory with the dual trigger, or is that something that you had to make specifically?
The older GCUs would have came with the two trigger systems, but to find an old GCU is next to impossible. So making one was much, much easier. So this is basically it.
So that's the brains behind the operation.
This is the brains, hands down. This is all your electronic control system, all of it right here. There's really not much to it, but at the same time, it's...
And that's where you can see the 2,000, 4,000 rate of fire. Real simple. It's got his company name right down there. So is this isn't regulated or serialized at all? This
No.
is just a
Everything
piece of electronics.
can be bought if you can find it or source it. That's not the issue. The only hard part is the housing.
So at this position, with this up, that puts the gun on live, so all the power's going to it. It's ready to fire. Then you can choose whatever button you want to send some freedom downrange. Thing's ridiculous. All right, back to you.
Okay. We're almost done here. Very few parts left.
So we're taking our time disassembling and we're talking about it and just kind of learning about this gun. But if you were focused and really trying to disassemble this gun and get it back into, to clean it or having to fix it, whatever, how long would it take you?
If I was really trying to crank out work to get this thing up, let's say there was a stoppage during a rental day or something like that, it'd only take me a few minutes.
Okay.
And if I ever had to do that too, I mean, you got to think, I'm not taking the GCU off or anything like that. It's pretty simple.
Get into the bare bones.
Right. It's usually a blown bolt head or a bad delinker, so it's almost snap-on parts, I like to think.
So going back to just cost of operating this, from what you explained to me, it seems like everything is relatively affordable. I mean, keep that in comparison to, other guns. That's an absurd statement, but for miniguns, your barrels, your bolts, different things like that, where's the real large investment on this? Is it going to be in the D-linker or?
Well, you know what, if you don't mind, since you're here, I'm going to have you hold that for
Sure.
me. It might be a little bit easier. Okay, there we go. Gonna make it look bad here. Your big investment would be the delinker. Your delinker is 99% of this gun. That is your entire feeding mechanism. So if anything is gonna break, most of the time it's gonna be your delinker. So your investment is usually gonna be here. Bolts, you're not gonna break as often, but you can. Again, $250 to $300 a bolt. I think the last bolt set I got was $1,880 shipped. So I'm not gonna blow through those very often. Usually a good old General Electric bolt will last about 250,000 rounds. So as long as you run a good ammo, quality stuff with good links, you shouldn't have an issue at all.
That's one thing to think about in owning and operating one of these guns too. I mean, this is really designed and purpose-built for military operations, and you have a team that is going to be able to service this, and think about the infrastructure behind or in the military to be able to maintain and take care of these firearms. It's a lot to keep these things running.
Yeah, the military, they're sending it to specialty armors. They're not letting, just ground troops play with these things and do this by any means. So if you don't mind, I brought the wrong wrench, so I hate using crescent wrenches, but we're going to have to use one for this. Hold these barrels steady for me, okay? I'll turn this gun back around here in a second. I just have to loosen these before I can get too far with them. This is what I get for not bringing the right tools.
Improvise.
You have to improvise. And there's only 3 bolts I just got to loosen. Then the rest, oops, here, we got to rotate this just a little bit. And the rest I can take off. There. Okay, that one's loose. That one's loose. That one's loose. All right. Here, let me rotate it back so you can see it. So this is going to be your rotor support that we're going to take off next. And after this, you'll see the rest of this gun is literally going to fall out.
What do you believe the overall weight? Do you have an overall weight of what this gun
Something
assembled and everything?
like this. I think the newer runs are running around 65 to 68 pounds. I think mine's running close to 80, 85. A lot of the new ones too, you're talking, Dillon started making stuff out of titanium. You have 3-piece titanium rotors versus Legacy Series General Electric parts like mine. So they lighten the weight as much as they could, because if you think on a helicopter, every pound counts when you're flying. So the less weight you got, the better it's gonna be. All right, so here's the fun part. This might get
A little messy?
not messy. I'm trying to think. This might be a little sticky, I think, to get this out. If you want to pull on the barrels, we might have to grab a hammer real quick. Yeah, we're gonna have to grab a hammer.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll take a quick break.
Yeah. Cut. All right, so we grabbed a hammer, we knocked the barrel cluster out, and now we're going to be taking a look at the ejector, right?
Correct. Round positioner. You'll have to excuse us for not taking this out on camera. This sits in here. It completes the track. Basically, as the rounds spin, they're ejecting out this side. It lets it roll through here, creates a path, and as it gets fed, it also creates a path. So
So it's both feeding and ejecting at the same time on either
Correct.
side of the...
yep, you can see the brass marks where the brass is rolling through it. So it's just rolling in 2 different directions on it. That's all it's doing.
Simple enough.
Yep. All right. So let's tap this out again. Where's my screwdriver? This should just pop real quick. Of course. Right when we got it out.
When in doubt, use a bigger hammer.
All right, there we go. It's a little stiff.
I wonder
So,
how much that alone weighs. I feel like that's a...
all right, so as you can see, here's the registered part. You know, we have a few things like the yoke, optics mount, you know, the safe and cover, everything is still on the housing. But this is your registered part right here. So if you take a look at it, there's really nothing much to it. It's just,
And you can
Do we
kind of
talk
see,
about?
kind of see that channel that we were talking about, what actually repositions the bolt within that housing, and that's going to reset the striker in each of your bolts. It's going to feed and extract and all that fun stuff.
actually, you know what we can do? Here's the one that doesn't have the grease on it. So as you can see, the bolt, it's literally just running through the channel, going up and down. Sorry, excuse my hand. Just go down.
Well, you see it works.
Yeah.
So we're just
literally
cycling
gonna
up and
spin
down.
Just
Interesting.
like that. And yes, those bolt heads are supposed to come apart, so that's not a big deal.
We didn't just break it.
Yeah, no, that's pretty common. That's not a big deal at all. See, back together.
And so at this point,
This
this
is-
gun is pretty much completely disassembled.
We'll
I
just
mean,
call this 100% disassembly. If you want to take your barrels off, you're more than welcome to take your barrels off. It's not a big deal. It's 1 pin or 1 screw right here. This holds your barrel clamp on. When you take the barrel clamp off, all you have to do is rotate these 180 degrees, and they're not even pressed in. They literally just slide inside the sleeve, and they pop right out. Very, very, very simple to take the barrels off these guns. Nothing to it.
Is there kind of like a notch or a pin, like kind of like you would see on an AR-15 barrel? They have kind of a setting port or a pin on the top of it to make sure it's seated properly against the upper receiver?
With this, there's spots on the barrels right here that actually make sure that they're positioned right. So you have a flat spot that when the clamp goes on, all the barrels will be positioned properly because the flat spot is going to go around inside the housing right here.
So that's to make sure they're all, I guess, timed properly, or what would you?
Not
what would
even
you want?
necessarily timed. There's nothing to really time on these. It's just to make sure they're all locked in. They're not going to spin. There's a half lug on the barrels back here. That half lug, again, if you twist it 180 degrees, it'll pop the barrel out and just slide it out. So you're moving the lug into a free path, and it slides out.
So up here, I'm assuming this is just a giant bearing to let those barrels rotate freely.
Correct. And that bearing just sits inside the housing right here. The rear bearing to that,
Is inside
correct,
there.
is right here. So, and that just sits
Obviously
like that.
reverse, but yeah.
Yep. So, and again, when you're looking at it, so now you have your motor driving right here.
And your D-linker would be underneath it.
Correct.
Imagine it, underneath this portion here, kind of.
And then this gear runs on right here. So, very, very
So
simple.
really, everything is based off of this gear, and then this gear is going to drive this, which is going to run your D-linker?
Correct.
Okay.
So, and you have, again, when we're talking malfunctions, stoppages, things like that, what to look for is the roll pins in here can get torqued and bent. So if something like that is bent, the gear might still feel solid, but if it's moved even, 1 full degree, it might misalign the timing system to this.
And that would give you a problem from the rounds taking from your D-linker and your feeder into here. And that's where they're not going to marry up if this isn't timed right.
Yes, so the handoff onto this is completely failed at that time. And without the proper timing in the handoff, this gun's just not going to feed, period.
Certainly.
Now, there is a little bit different version. The newer stuff runs a clutch pack on the back. So the clutch replaces the bearing in this rear gear. That basically allows a timeless system. All you got to do is pop a delinker on it. You don't have to time it, don't do anything. It's an electronic driven clutch. A solenoid's on the back of that, and it automatically times everything for you.
That's nice.
So when you let off the triggers on those things, it's very convenient. It'll stop ammo. It'll spin the barrels out, clean the barrels, and stop live ammo from feeding into it. So you're not throwing live ammo out the side or anything like that. The gun is always going to be clear, and we'll go from there. But
So let's wrap up and talk about this D-linker real quick. You were explaining to me that as far as the engineering for this particular gun, this is probably the most complicated and involved portion is this D-linker. This is really where the engineering and the smarts had to go in to get this gun to feed and operate so quickly.
correct. Delinkers are, I'd say, hands down, 99% of your gun. If there's an issue with your gun, I'd start with a delinker every single time, no matter what. Delinkers, you got to figure this thing is rotating so darn fast, it's not even funny. And you're stripping the links, the rounds out of the links. You're throwing everything out of this at an extremely high rate of fire. So
There's no real room for error when it comes to this, and that's
There's not.
So one of the reasons that these can be somewhat finicky, especially if you're saying that roll pin gets bent or torqued or something in the rear. If it's not perfectly married up and timed, they can get really, really finicky.
correct. So we're talking a simple stoppage can destroy this whole system. Not necessarily destroy it, but stop it from working until you have to rebuild it. In Vietnam, interesting fact, at about 35,000 rounds, they throw the delinkers out. They wasn't even worth keeping them. So at 35,000 rounds, they're putting a brand new delinker on it just to keep the gun running.
And to give you a perspective, 3,500 rounds,
1,000.
Roger that. Okay, I thought you said 3,500.
Oh, sorry.
Because that'd take around 10 seconds.
Yeah.
You,
A few minutes of
35,000. Yeah. 35,000. Even still, you could run through 35,000 rounds very, very quickly. So all in all, I think that covers most of how you assemble or disassemble. We're not going to go through the process of assembly. If you want to see that, just put the video in reverse and we'll put it back together. But guys, this is a M134 minigun. This one's GE specific, right? Is that
Correct.
General Electric?
Yep.
But that's pretty much the function of, or the disassembly and how a minigun actually works. So again, thank you, Chris, for coming out, sharing with us, bringing your actual minigun, and kind of teaching us how these things work. Be sure to check out all his social media stuff, his company. We'll put links to his Facebook and everything below so you can check out what he does. Thanks for watching, guys. Again, this is Philip with Royal Range USA.